The intersection of public transit investment and housing accessibility. Introduction. In recent years, the discussion surrounding public transportation investment and housing accessibility has become increasingly urgent, particularly in states like California. As cities grapple with soaring housing costs and the need for efficient transit systems, a clear disconnect has emerged. Billions of public dollars are being funneled into transit infrastructure while zoning laws remain restrictive, effectively preventing affordable housing from being developed near these transportation hubs. This report delves into the key arguments being made by stakeholders, the public sentiment, and the broader implications of these discussions for urban development. The call for change. On July 8, 2025, a significant dialogue took place on social media platforms, particularly Twitter, where advocates for housing reform emphasized the necessity of aligning public transit investments with zoning reforms. Max Dubler, a prominent voice in this discourse, argued that if substantial public funds are being allocated to build and maintain transit systems, it is imperative to change the zoning regulations around these stations. The aim is to enable a broader segment of the population to live near transit without facing prohibitive costs such as $2 million for a single-family home. California YMBY Yes in My Backyard echoed this sentiment, stating, "We invest billions in transit while actively preventing housing nearby. California's future depends on fixing this disconnect." This statement encapsulates the frustration felt by many as they witnessed the juxtaposition of significant public investment in transportation infrastructure and the restrictive housing policies that limit access to those services. Key arguments and stakeholder perspectives. 1. Investment versus accessibility. One of the fundamental arguments made by Dubler and California YMBY is that without legalizing housing development in proximity to transit stations, the effectiveness of these investments is severely hampered. Public transit systems are designed to provide mobility and accessibility. However, if potential users cannot afford to live nearby, the benefits of these systems are not fully realized. 2. Legislative action. Several political figures, including California Assembly member Laura Friedman and U.S. Representative Scott Peters, have publicly called for legislative changes that would facilitate increased housing density around transit stations. Their argument is clear: it is impractical to continue investing heavily in transportation infrastructure while simultaneously constraining who can live close enough to utilize it effectively. 3. Public sentiment. The frustration expressed on social media reflects a growing awareness and dissatisfaction among residents. Many individuals desire the convenience of living near public transit but find themselves priced out of the market. This discontent underscores a broader societal issue where access to essential services is increasingly tied to economic status. The broader context. The ongoing conversation about transit investments and housing accessibility is part of a larger movement that has been gaining momentum over recent years, primarily as cities respond to escalating housing costs. The urgency of these discussions is heightened as public transit projects are planned or already underway, prompting advocates to stress that zoning laws must be addressed concurrently to ensure that these investments align with community needs. Historically, zoning laws have often favored single-family homes and low-density development, which can exacerbate housing shortages and limit options for lower-income residents. Changing these laws to allow for higher-density housing, such as apartments and townhouses, near transit stations is viewed as a necessary step to not only improve accessibility but also to promote sustainable urban development. Comparative perspectives. While Dubler and California YMBY focus on the financial implications of transit investments and zoning restrictions, discussions on platforms like Reddit often bring in personal anecdotes and broader community perspectives. These conversations highlight the grassroots impact of zoning laws and the everyday challenges faced by residents seeking affordable housing options near transit. The organized advocacy from political figures suggests a formal push for policy changes. While community discussions often emphasize the human element, individual stories that illustrate the systemic barriers imposed by current zoning regulations. Conclusion. The intersection of public transit investment and housing accessibility presents a critical challenge that urban planners, policymakers, and communities must address. The dialogue reflected in recent social media discussions underscores a growing recognition that changing zoning laws is essential to avoid exacerbating housing inequalities while maximizing the benefits of public transit systems. As cities move forward with transit projects, it is imperative that they also consider the implications of zoning regulations. By creating policies that encourage affordable housing development near transit hubs, communities can foster more equitable access to transportation, reduce reliance on cars, and promote sustainable urban growth. Ultimately, aligning housing policies with public transit investments is not just a matter of convenience. It is a crucial step toward creating inclusive and accessible urban environments for all residents. The discussion around the integration of public transit investment and zoning laws reveals several counterintuitive insights regarding urban development and housing affordability. Here are some of those points. 1. Investment without accessibility. At first glance, one might assume that investing billions in public transit would naturally lead to increased access for residents. However, the reality is that these investments often do not translate into greater accessibility for lower-income populations due to restrictive zoning laws. This disconnect suggests that simply pouring money into infrastructure is insufficient. Effective policy changes regarding housing are equally crucial. 2. Misalignment of public funds. It's counterintuitive to think that public funds which are meant to serve the community can lead to increased inequality. Yet, the current situation demonstrates that financial investments in transit without accompanying changes in zoning can exacerbate housing challenges. This contradiction highlights a systemic issue where the benefits of infrastructure development are not equitably distributed. 3. Political advocacy versus community experience. While political figures and advocates like Max Dubler and California YMBY are calling for policy changes, the grassroots sentiment often reveals a different narrative. Community discussions may focus on personal struggles and experiences that political discourse tends to overlook. This disparity indicates that advocacy efforts may not always align with the lived realities of residents, revealing that top-down solutions may not address on-the-ground challenges effectively. 4. Zoning is a barrier to success. The notion that zoning laws are a barrier to the success of transit systems is perhaps unexpected. One might assume that zoning is primarily a tool for urban planning and development. However, it can also hinder the very objectives that transit investments are meant to achieve. This perspective challenges traditional views of zoning as merely regulatory, highlighting its role in perpetuating housing shortages and accessibility issues. 5. The role of public sentiment. The expressed frustration from residents regarding the high costs of living near transit is a powerful counterpoint to the assumption that public transit investments will automatically lead to improved housing options. The reality is that without proactive measures to amend zoning laws, these investments might primarily benefit wealthier individuals while leaving lower-income residents out in the cold, contradicting the intended purpose of public transit. 6. Urgency versus complacency. There's a paradox in the urgency expressed by advocates for changing zoning laws in response to transit investments. While immediate action appears necessary to create sustainable urban environments, the entrenched nature of zoning regulations often leads to complacency and resistance to change. This highlights a critical tension between the need for rapid adaptation to changing urban landscapes and the slow-moving nature of legislative processes. 7. Long-term versus short-term solutions. The focus on immediate zoning changes may overshadow the need for long-term strategies that consider the evolving nature of urban living and transportation. While it may seem logical to address zoning in the short term, this approach could neglect broader systemic issues such as economic inequality and housing market fluctuations that also contribute to the challenges faced by residents. 8. Perception of density. The advocacy for increased housing density near transit hubs may seem counterintuitive to those who view density as a negative aspect of urban living. However, the argument posits that density can actually enhance community vibrancy and accessibility. challenging preconceived notions that associate high-density living with overcrowding and reduced quality of life. In conclusion, the integration of public transit investment with housing policy reform presents a complex interplay of factors that defy simple narratives. The disconnect between financial investment in transit and the restrictive zoning laws illustrates a significant challenge in urban planning that requires nuanced understanding and strategic action to ensure that public resources serve the broader community effectively. In the discussion about public investment in transit systems and the zoning laws that dictate residential development near these transit hubs, several critical yet often overlooked aspects emerge that bear significant implications for urban planning, social equity, and economic viability. Here, I will delve into these important content areas and explain their significance to the broader conversation about public transit and housing. 1. The impacts of zoning laws on housing affordability. Significance. Zoning laws are often perceived as mere regulatory frameworks guiding land use, yet they fundamentally shape the accessibility and affordability of housing. When zoning laws are restrictive, favoring single-family homes over multifamily units, they create artificial scarcity, driving up housing prices and preventing lower-income families from living near transit. The significance of this point lies in its direct connection to social equity. Restrictive zoning often benefits wealthier residents while marginalizing lower-income groups, limiting their access to essential services and job opportunities located near transit hubs. The failure to address these zoning restrictions can perpetuate socioeconomic divides, making it imperative for policymakers to recognize the broader implications of zoning decisions. 2. The disconnect between investment and accessibility. Significance. The investment of billions of public dollars into transit infrastructures without corresponding changes in zoning laws reflects a profound disconnect between policy intentions and real-world outcomes. This is particularly significant because it highlights inefficiencies in public spending. Taxpayers expect that their contributions will yield tangible benefits, including improved access to affordable housing. The significance is compounded by the fact that public transit is intended to serve as a lifeline for all citizens, not just those who can afford to live in expensive neighborhoods. When public investment does not correlate with accessible housing options, it undermines the fundamental purpose of transit systems, which is to facilitate mobility and connection within urban areas. 3. Political advocacy and legislative push. Significance. The active role of political figures, such as Representatives Laura Friedman and Scott Peters, in advocating for zoning reforms is crucial but may not receive the attention it deserves. Their advocacy symbolizes a shift towards recognizing housing as a critical component of transit planning. The political will to change zoning laws is necessary for translating public investment in transit into real-world benefits for residents, especially in urban areas plagued by housing shortages. The significance of political advocacy lies in its potential to catalyze legislative change. When legislators actively engage in this dialogue, they can mobilize community support, influence public opinion, and ultimately lead to reforms that integrate housing and transit planning more effectively. 4. Community sentiment and grassroots movements. Significance. The expressions of frustration and demand for change on social media platforms reflect a larger grassroots movement advocating for affordable housing near transit. This grassroots sentiment can often be overlooked in favor of institutional narratives. Yet it represents the voices of those most affected by zoning restrictions. The significance of community sentiment lies in its ability to influence policymakers. When constituents vocalize their needs and frustrations, it creates pressure for elected officials to act. This grassroots momentum can lead to policy changes that prioritize the needs of residents over the interests of developers and existing homeowners. 5. Long-term urban planning and sustainability. Significance. The integration of housing and transit planning is not just about immediate accessibility, it pertains to long-term urban sustainability. By allowing higher density housing near transit stations, cities can reduce reliance on cars, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and promote more sustainable urban growth patterns. The significance here is multifaceted. It speaks to environmental stewardship, economic resilience, and the creation of vibrant, livable communities. As cities grapple with climate change and urban sprawl, the need for sustainable transit-oriented development becomes increasingly critical. 6. Economic implications of transit-oriented development. Significance. The economic implications of transit-oriented development (TOD) are often underappreciated. Effective zoning reforms that allow for diverse housing options near transit can stimulate local economies, create jobs, and enhance property values. Increased density around transit hubs can lead to a more robust local economy where businesses thrive due to higher foot traffic and a larger customer base. The significance of this economic perspective is that it positions zoning reform not merely as a social issue but as a key driver of economic development. Policymakers and community stakeholders should recognize that fostering affordable housing near transit can have far-reaching economic benefits that contribute to the overall health of urban areas. Conclusion. In summary, the discussion around public investment in transit systems and zoning reforms is layered with complexities that extend beyond the immediate concerns of housing affordability. The intersection of zoning laws with social equity, political advocacy, community sentiment, urban sustainability, and economic development encapsulates a broader narrative about how cities can evolve to meet the needs of all residents. Recognizing and addressing these often overlooked aspects is essential for fostering inclusive urban environments that leverage public investment in transit to create accessible, affordable, and vibrant communities. The discussion surrounding public investment in transit systems and the related zoning laws is critical for addressing housing accessibility in urban environments. Here are the 4 most valuable points for in-depth analysis and discussion. 1. Investment versus accessibility. The core issue highlighted by advocates like Max Dubler and California YMBY is the disconnection between significant public investment in transit infrastructure and the restrictive zoning laws that inhibit affordable housing near transit stations. The billions spent on developing and maintaining these transit systems should correspond with policies that allow for increased housing density in their vicinity. If zoning laws remain unchanged, the effectiveness of these investments is diminished, as lower-income residents may be unable to access the very transit services designed to benefit them. This point raises questions about the purpose of public investment and the societal responsibilities attached to it. 2. Call for legislative change. There is a pressing need for legislative reform to facilitate increased housing density near transit hubs. Political figures such as Laura Friedman and Scott Peters argue that it is impractical to spend public funds on transportation infrastructure while simultaneously placing restrictions on who can live nearby. This call to action emphasizes the necessity of aligning housing policies with transit investments to ensure that all community members can benefit from these public services. Analyzing the legislative framework surrounding zoning laws and transit funding can reveal systemic barriers and potential pathways for reform. 3. Public sentiment and community frustration. The sentiment expressed on social media platforms indicates a growing frustration among residents regarding housing affordability and accessibility to public transit. Many individuals desire to live near transit options but are deterred by high housing costs, often exacerbated by zoning restrictions. This public outcry underscores the importance of community engagement in policymaking processes. Understanding the perspectives of those directly affected by these issues can help create more inclusive and effective housing policies that consider the needs and desires of the community. 4. The urgency of addressing zoning laws. The timeline of events indicates that the conversation about transit investment and zoning laws is part of a broader movement reacting to rising housing costs in urban areas. The urgency in the messages suggests that as public transit projects are planned or underway, it is critical to address zoning laws concurrently. Failing to do so risks exacerbating existing housing inequalities and undermining the intended benefits of transit investments. Analyzing the timing and context of housing and transit policy discussions can provide insight into how to effectively advocate for change and ensure that new developments truly serve the community. In summary, the integration of public transit investment with thoughtful zoning policies is essential for creating accessible urban environments. Recognizing the significance of these points can help drive a more comprehensive discussion on how to effectively address the challenges of housing affordability and transit accessibility in contemporary urban planning. 1. The New York City subway system and the zoning changes of the 1960s. In the mid-20th century, New York City faced significant challenges regarding its subway system. The city had invested heavily in expanding the subway to accommodate a growing population. However, as public transit expanded, the zoning laws did not keep pace with the need for affordable housing near transit hubs. In the 1960s, city planners and advocates began to recognize the need for zoning changes that would allow for higher density residential development near subway stations. This led to the implementation of the transit-oriented development model in several neighborhoods, which aimed to increase accessibility and affordability by allowing for mixed-use developments that included both commercial and residential spaces near transit lines. This historical case highlights the connection between public transit investment and the necessity of modifying zoning laws to create more livable urban areas. 2. The Bay Area Rapid Transit BART and the 1970s housing crisis. The Bay Area Rapid Transit BART system, which opened in the 1970s, was built to connect various cities across the San Francisco Bay Area. At the same time, the region was experiencing a housing crisis, with skyrocketing prices and limited affordable options. Despite significant public funds being allocated for BART's construction, the zoning laws surrounding many stations remained restrictive, making it difficult to develop affordable housing nearby. In response, housing advocates pushed for changes in zoning regulations to allow for higher density housing, arguing that the investment in transit infrastructure should be matched with policies that support affordable living options. This case from the 1970s serves as an important reminder of the ongoing struggle between transit development and housing accessibility. 3. Los Angeles Metro and the affordable housing crisis. In the 21st century, Los Angeles has witnessed a significant expansion of its metro rail system, with billions of dollars dedicated to improving public transit. However, the city's zoning laws have often restricted the development of affordable housing near these new transit stations. Housing advocates and urban planners have argued that without revising these zoning regulations, the benefits of the metro expansion will not be fully realized, as many residents will still be priced out of living near transit. Efforts have been made in recent years to push for changes that would legalize higher density housing in close proximity to metro stations, reflecting the continued relevance of public investment in transit and the necessity for supportive housing policies. This situation in Los Angeles underscores the critical need for synchronized planning between transit development and housing policies to ensure that public investments serve the broader community effectively. Future outlook: predictions for transit and housing integration. As urban centers continue to grapple with escalating housing costs and the urgent need for sustainable transit solutions, the integration of public transit investment and affordable housing policy will become increasingly critical. Here's a look at the future predictions based on current trends and discussions surrounding zoning laws and transit systems. 1. Increased legislative action on zoning. In the coming years, we can expect a significant push for legislative reforms aimed at altering zoning laws around transit stations. As advocates like Max Dubler and organizations such as California YMBY highlight, the disconnect between transit investments and housing accessibility is unsustainable. By 2030, it is likely that many urban areas will adopt new zoning regulations that facilitate higher density housing and mixed-use developments near transit hubs. This could include easing restrictions for multifamily units and reducing the barriers for developers to create affordable housing. 2. Shift towards mixed-use developments. As cities prioritize sustainability and livability, mixed-use developments will become more common near transit stations. By integrating residential, commercial and recreational spaces, these developments will promote a vibrant community atmosphere while ensuring that residents have easy access to public transportation. Urban planners will increasingly recognize that walkable neighborhoods reduce reliance on cars, leading to a decrease in traffic congestion and pollution. 3. Rising public awareness and engagement. Public sentiment is shifting with growing awareness of the importance of affordable housing in relation to transit access. As social media discussions and grassroots movements gain momentum, residents will increasingly demand that local governments prioritize housing policies that complement transit investments. This heightened engagement will lead to more community-driven planning processes where residents have input in the development of their neighborhoods. 4. Technological innovations in housing construction. The construction industry is on the brink of a technological revolution that will make housing development more efficient and cost-effective. Innovations such as modular construction, 3D printing, and sustainable building materials will reduce the overall costs of building affordable housing. By the late 2020s, these technologies may enable faster construction of housing units near transit stations, helping to meet the growing demand for affordable living options. 5. Increased collaboration between government and private sector. The future will likely see stronger partnerships between government entities and private developers. As cities recognize the economic and social benefits of integrating housing and transit, public-private partnerships will become a key strategy for funding and developing affordable housing projects. These collaborations will allow for innovative financing models that leverage both public funds and private investment, maximizing the impact of transit expenditures. 6. Focus on climate resilience and sustainability. As climate change continues to be a pressing global issue, urban planners will increasingly focus on creating transit-oriented developments that are environmentally sustainable. By 2030, we can expect to see a surge in eco-friendly housing options near transit stations, including energy-efficient buildings, green spaces, and the incorporation of renewable energy sources. This focus on sustainability will not only benefit the environment but also enhance the quality of life for residents. 7. Potential for policy replication across regions. The successful integration of affordable housing with transit systems in California could serve as a model for other regions facing similar challenges. As cities across the United States and globally look for solutions to their housing crises, they may replicate California's strategies, leading to a broader movement towards transit-oriented development. This could initiate a nationwide trend of re-evaluating zoning laws in favor of more inclusive and accessible urban planning. 8. Emergence of new housing models. The future may also see the emergence of alternative housing models designed to promote affordability and accessibility. Co-housing, community land trusts, and other innovative approaches will gain traction as communities seek to address the high costs of living near transit. These models will provide residents with diverse options that meet their needs without the prohibitive price tags typically associated with urban living. Conclusion. The future of urban living hinges on the successful integration of public transit investments with affordable housing policies. As cities confront the dual challenges of rising housing costs and the need for sustainable transportation solutions, proactive measures will be essential. By embracing legislative reform, technological innovation, and community engagement, urban areas can create environments where residents have access to both affordable housing and efficient transit options. The coming years will be pivotal in shaping the landscape of urban living, making it more inclusive, sustainable, and accessible for all.